Now it's really recording. So, let's talk a little bit about Chanukah. So, we see over in the Torah, it talks about how there's a commandment to build the the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the desert, and one of the commandments in the tabernacle was to build a menorah, a candelabra, and that candelabra in the menorah had 7 branches. Now, when the Greeks came into the second holy temple, and they wanted to destroy everything, they wanted to render everything impure. So in order to light the menorah, there had to be use of olive oil, pure olive oil that was freshly pressed, and then was sealed by the Kohen Gadol, by the high priest, as being pure, that it never became ritually impure. And only that oil could be used was the preferable oil to use for the menorah, for the candelabra. But what happened was that when the Greeks came in, they rendered all those vessels of oil impure, and then they just wanted to make everything impure. So when the Hashmonaim were successful and they overtook the Greeks and defeated the Greeks, then they came into the temple and they could not find any intact cruisers of oil, any intact oil jugs, and they only found one that still had the seal of the high priest. So that was enough for one day, and they lit it, and they still needed other days to go and find olive trees, and then to press the olives and bring them back. That was going to take about a week.
How many days it lasted?
So it lasted 8 days, miraculously. Yes. So that's the miracle of Chanukah, one of the miracles of Chanukah, that the oil lasted 8 days. And so we celebrate that by lighting the menorah every night for 8 days, 8 nights. And then we start at 1, we go to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We add 1 candle each night, representing the increase of the miracle each day.
Right.
Excuse me. And so the concept is, it's representing that the really the only way for humanity to not just to survive, but to thrive in the world, to be successful in a permanent way, is when there's the holiness that the Jewish priests in the temple bring into the world, and the Jewish people bring into the world, and that's something that the world needs to support and encourage that, because that brings not just the goodness and the righteousness that the non-Jews could do in their service in the world, but there's the holiness that the Jewish people bring into the world through their service, and the two together create really a perfect world. That's the combination of the two, is through the setting the foundation of stability and righteousness and civilization, and then the Jewish people bringing holiness into the world. So when King Solomon built the first temple, he actually created an additional 10 menorahs, 10 candelabra with 7 branches each, to represent, and put those in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash, of the temple, in order to represent the 70 nations, and that this light should go out to the 70 nations. And not only that, but the way the windows were built in the temple was to allow, they were built with the inside more narrow and the outside more broad, wider, to allow the light to go out of the temple and to spread to the whole world. So that's the whole concept of Chanukah, is to bring that light into the entire world for everyone's benefit. And it actually says in one of the, there's a sefer called the Baal Shem Tov's commentaries on Tehillim, on the book of Psalms. And there it's brought down in the name of the Baal Shem Tov that Chanukah is from the language of chinuch, of education, of properly training. That's what chinuch means. And Chanukah represents the training, the education that the Jewish people did when they were victorious. The Hashmonaim, they were the family of people that were successful in defeating the Greeks, of training the world in being righteous in the 7 laws of Noah. Because once they defeated the Greeks, they were then able to broadcast the message of righteousness and the foundation of civilization to the entire world. So that's the concept of Chanukah. And also we know that even though the number of people that rose up against the Greeks was extremely small, just a small group of people, small family that rose up against the Greeks, yet it was enough that their actions, even though numerically it made no sense and had no chance of success, the fact that even a small number of people showed the willingness to sacrifice their lives to fight for God, then that was something that was enough for God to respond in kind, and then to provide the victory. The military victory was entirely miraculous also.
How did they win?
So they won because of many miracles, miracle after miracle of defeating the Greek army. From God. One of the turning points in the victory also was there was a Jewish woman that convinced the head of the army, that the Greek army, that she was going to had information for him and so forth, and would be able to be available to him. And so what she did is she first fed him a lot of cheeses to make him very thirsty. Then she fed him, gave him wine to drink, which made him drunk. And then he fell asleep and he passed out and fell into a deep sleep. And then she chopped off his head. And then she took his head and she took it to the walls of the city and showed the enemy, the Greek troops, that their leader was dead.
It was a Jewish woman.
Right, that was, yeah.
She was basically working for the Greeks. I mean, not working, but
No, she was a Jewish woman, and the Greek general liked her. He saw that she was a beautiful woman. Right, so then he was attracted to her, and so then she used that as a ploy to get him to trust her, and then she executed him.
Right.
And then she was able to show his head to his own soldiers, and then they saw that they just fled. So that was another huge piece of the victory, the miraculous victory. So there's many, many lessons we can learn from Chanukah, and it's really about the importance and the essentialness of transcending the limitations of nature, because we start to think that we're limited by the laws of nature. And the fact of the matter is that God could help us transcend nature. We can go beyond the natural order of things. We can have miraculous things happen even in an individual's life.
That is very true.
If a person's willing to trust in God and believe that God could do anything, then God can do anything.
And also do some of the work, because, I mean, the guy does, right, miracles, does things, but you have to also, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, you have to, do some part.
You have to do your part to go all the way to
Right.
as far as you could possibly go, and then God will bridge the gap. That's the miracle. And that attitude is what's necessary to really transform the world, because people just say they're going to live within the rules of nature, and they're limited by the rules of nature. Well, there's not very far they can go. Once they see the possibility that the whole world could be transformed, and that they can cause an impact in the world that is way beyond the natural order of things. So we're sitting here, just a few people, and we're thinking, well, how could we reach 8 billion people? Well, we just have to go as far as we can, to do as much as we can, and we will see that God will make a miracle that whereas we reach 100, we reach 1,000, reach 10,000, all of a sudden it'll be 1 billion, and it'll be 5 billion, it'll be 8 billion. It could happen in a matter of minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we see from the Chanukah miracle, is that the numbers are irrelevant. It's really what counts is what the person's intention is, and what his orientation is. If he's directed towards God Almighty, then he becomes a vessel for God Almighty's blessings and for his miracles. And one of the other lessons we can learn from Chanukah is that the forces that fight against God Almighty always want to try to secularize things. They want to say, okay, you could do these customs, but as long as you don't involve God in it. So they were the Greeks were very much against the Jewish people doing anything that didn't make sense, any laws.
I'm sorry, the Greeks said that to the Jewish people?
Yeah, they forbid them from doing stuff that was above reason.
They didn't want worshiping God.
They didn't want worshiping God, but they didn't want the Jewish people doing anything that didn't make sense. That made no sense. Because for the Greeks, everything was based on the reason, rationality. rationality. Everything has to make sense. So the end result was that if the Jewish people had a law that didn't make sense, then they didn't want that. So circumcision. For the Greeks, that doesn't make sense. Because that's just a command of God. You can say, okay, don't steal from somebody. That makes sense, according to them. But not circumcising doesn't make sense, according to them. Or the Jewish, declaring the months, the Jewish months, according to the lunar calendar. That's something that's also they fought against. And Shabbos, the Sabbath, that you would stop a whole day from doing any impact on the world, to them didn't make any sense. So they did everything possible to try to demoralize the Jewish people into thinking that making the Jewish people think that, that the Greek way, the Greek culture was the way of the future. That all the traditional commandments of the Jewish people, that was all in the past. Like that was in the past. That was like more primitive. But the Greeks were here. They figured everything out. Everything was scientific and made sense and was subject to questioning and reason, and therefore you couldn't do anything unless it made sense. So that's what what they wanted to try to establish in the world. They wanted to extinguish the concept of the Jewish people as the people that were living above nature, that were living above reason. And that's what their goal was. And they came very close because they convinced a lot, through fear and through persuasion and demoralization, they convinced a large part of the Jewish people to concede and to try to go along with the Greek lifestyle. So it was a minority of people that were willing to stay strong in spite of the danger. And there was an even smaller subset of those who were willing to fight. So the number that were willing to fight was actually very small, as I said before. But because they were willing to fight, they were willing to, God came into the picture, because they were doing it out of a calling from God, not out of some sort of reason that this made sense or they calculated that it was likely to be victorious. So we have to keep all these things in mind. We have to watch out for the same Greek mythology today, same Greek ideology. Everything has to make sense. You have to follow the science, right? What they call science, which is just their religious beliefs. And it requires the religious conformity, the religious performance of what they believe. Otherwise, they want to destroy anyone, because if they come to a person and says, "This what makes sense according to their logic," and you say, "I won't have anything to do with that," then you are representing your own independent thinking. You're representing your own. You're going to ask God what the right thing to do is. You're going to go and turn to tradition, to divine commandments, to determine what's right. You're not going to base it on what someone in 2021 decides he's now decided everyone needs to do. It's not a question of whether their science is right or wrong. That's a separate question, whether it's right or wrong. But even if they were right, we don't make our decisions based on science. Make our decisions based on the Torah. And the Torah transcends science. It transcends the laws of nature. And that's what we have to really keep in mind. That's why we have to be careful not to get into all these scientific arguments. Because what happens is you get into scientific arguments with them and they're like, okay, you say your statistics are like that, they say the statistics are like that. But it's all a debate in science. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter to me what the numbers say. I don't need to debate the numbers with them, because I'm not making a decision based on their numbers. Or my numbers. I'm not making a decision based on numbers. I'm making a decision based on what the Torah says. Based on what God says. And that's what we need to have, that reawakening among humanity in our generation. And that's the only way to bring humanity to a level of freedom and true liberty. Because once humanity subjects itself to a rule that's based on other people's calculations, or even based on his own calculations, but it's not based on divine inspiration. It's based on a cold mathematical rule. So based on a certain statistical result, then the behavior has to be like that. Based on another statistical result, the behavior has to be like that. That is slavery to man-made categorizations. I mean, after all, what is science? In its best form is merely man-made observations to the best of its ability and categorization and measurements and offering possible descriptions and explanations of what's happening. That's what science is in its best form. But so it's just a human creation, just a human analysis. It's a human proposition as to what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So that our job is to uncouple ourselves from that type of thinking. Chanukah is saying, come and uncouple ourselves from the thinking of this idea that we are in any way have to give place to this type of thinking. That's not where we get our inspiration from. That's not where God speaks through. God does not speak through human beings trying to make up explanations for what's happening and making predictions that are even less reliable than their explanations. Their explanations for what is and what's happening, what happened in the past, is entirely faulty. Their predictions for the future are even less relevant and reliable. So our only way to avoid the slavery of that type of thinking is to say, no, I'm not getting into that type of thinking. I'm not going to debate with you the question of whether or not this number is like that or this number is like that, or whether the world temperature is going up or not going up. It could be going up, it could be going down. Totally, that's not relevant to my calculations. My calculations are not calculations. My calculations are following the commands of God Almighty. So that's what we see from the story of Chanukah.
Mm-hmm.
That the Jewish revolt against the revolting idea that human reason is the highest form to be aspiring to.
The numbers were against the Jewish people, but
The numbers were against the Jewish people tremendously, right? And then statistically, in terms of actually standing up in a revolt,
mm-hmm.
it was statistically impossible. But it ties together because the statistical impossibility of the battle is related to the whole statement, which is that we're not governed by statistics. We're not governed by the rules of warfare. We're not governed by the rules of nature. We're not governed by the man's attempt to explain things, past, present, or future. That doesn't affect us. So that's what we could take from the lesson of Chanukah. Now let's take it. Now we're going to do some of the Parshas. Just want to make sure the camera's working. So far, so good. Okay, so this week's Torah portion, Parshas Miketz, Torah portion Miketz, which means at the end of this time period, if we remember from last week, we had this dramatic experience where Joseph, who remained righteous even though he was in a place of depravity. So we talked before about the Greek idea, which is also depravity, but there was based on human reason, and then a person could do whatever they wanted. In Egypt, a person could just do whatever they wanted because of whatever their pleasure was, whatever their direction they wanted to do. So there was no moral code. And so Joseph was able to remain righteous in the face of all that. And as we said, he withheld himself from committing adultery with his master's wife, and as a result of her claiming that he tried to be inappropriate with her, then he ended up imprisoned. And the two of the other prisoners had dreams, and he interpreted the dreams for them, and he asked the wine steward to please remember him, and because he put his so much faith in this wine steward, he ended up remaining in that prison for an extra 2 years. And it wasn't until Paro, so we see from that we can't rely on any human being. We're not meant to rely on any human being, because God's ability to carry out what his plan is does not depend on any one human being, or any two human beings, or all human beings. So after 2 years, then Paro, the king of Egypt, had a dream, and he had a dream that he was standing by the Nile River, and there were 7 good-looking cows, strong cows that came out of the Nile, and he started eating, and then after 7 thin cows came out and ate the healthy cows, and then he also had a second dream where there's 7 ears of grain growing on a single stalk, and then there were 7 ears that came that were very, very thin and gaunt and swallowed up the healthy ears. So he couldn't find an interpretation. No one was able to explain this to him. And the wine steward remembered, oh, yeah, there was a guy who had interpreted dreams back there in that prison. And he spoke up to Paro about that. He said, oh, there's a Jewish young man that has the capability of interpreting this. And so Joseph was brought out and from the prison, and he was now brought to interpret Paro's dream. And he said to him, God is going to provide the answer. Meaning to say, he was not basing it on his own power. He specifically says, it's not by my own power. Rather, God is going to provide the answer. That is the key. The key is our humility to know that all that is happening to us is coming through God. Even if we have a wise idea, even if we have a smart idea, that idea is coming through God. When God provides us an insight, it's coming from God. That's the difference between the Egyptian ideal and the Greek ideal, which is that's the human mind or some false god that's providing the answers. But rather, the key is that to know that God is providing the answer. What's interesting is that after Joseph presented this answer to them, everyone was they saw this as a brilliant answer. What was his answer? His answer that there's going to be 7 years of plenty. That God is telling Paro through this dream, 7 years of plenty are coming. Excuse me, and then there's going to be 7 years of famine that are going to actually be so strong that it will eradicate the memory of the prosperous years. So it's interesting to note how once he gave this explanation, number one is everyone said, oh, that they knew it was true. It's interesting. We all have a truth meter. We can tell when the truth is being said. You know, here's a person who was just taken out of prison, and he's interpreting a dream. But they knew intuitively that was the right answer. They already had a vision that was the right answer, even though they couldn't put the answer together with the question. So it shows us that human beings have an ability to know the truth. They're able to distinguish the truth from falsehood. That's why we have to trust our common sense. We have to listen to our common sense. We have to listen to the intuition and the gut feelings that God puts into us. He lets us know what's right and wrong, even if we can't explain it. So Paro saw the wisdom of Joseph, and he decided to appoint him to be the one in charge of the whole process, make him the second to the king, and be in charge of the entire process of preparing Egypt for this famine, which meant collecting all the food, and then creating storage facilities, and then being able to distribute the food to people when the famine started after 7 years. And so that's what happened over 7 years. Joseph collected all the surplus foods, and so then the famine began, and
so Joseph was taken out of jail and promoted.
Joseph was taken out of jail and was miraculously promoted. Right, exactly. Because of his ability because God gifted him with the answer to the dream. So then starts a whole incredible, dramatic exchange between his brothers who are still in the land of Israel. It's called the land of Canaan at the time, and they needed to go down and to get food. And so Jacob sent them down to get food and held back the youngest brother, Benjamin, who Jacob was afraid of losing, because remember that the brothers had sold Joseph into slavery and taken the bloody coat of Joseph to their father to show him that, to lead him to believe that Joseph had been killed. So now Yaakov was afraid the same thing would happen to Benjamin. To Binyamin, And so Joseph sees them coming, and he brings them before him, and he accuses them of being spies. He's saying that they just came to spy out the land, and they're going to attack the land, and he therefore created a whole scheme in which to entrap them into bringing their younger brother. Because he knew that he had a dream. If you recall, he had originally had a dream that all his brothers and his father and his mother were going to bow down to him. So that was what he was. He then started to have an idea on how to make that happen. So first he was going to have all the brothers come down, and so he did that through a whole scheme of getting them to, giving them back their money, and then getting them to bring back, just throwing them off at every stage, throwing them off so they were off guard, accusing them of things, and then being kind to them, and the money coming back unexpectedly. It's very interesting. We can learn this. We can learn from this that the manipulative power of control, when a person has control over other people, and how he will just keep them off balance, making false accusations against them, then showing niceness to them, then all of a sudden reversing the rules, then all of a sudden getting them a different way. So it's all calculated to keep them off balance. So the brothers, Joseph knew that his brothers were extremely powerful. They were strong enough to overthrow the Egyptian government. So he had to keep them always emotionally uneasy. They were never sure of themselves. They were always like he was always one step ahead of them, and he was always keeping them off balance. So they could never gain their balance. That's really the theme of the whole story, about how he was able to manipulate them into coming down into Egypt with their younger brother. So they had all the brothers there. And he could set the stage to carry out what he wanted to carry out. But in order to be able to do that, he first had to be able to just keep knocking them, keeping them off balance with accusations and the changes and the niceness and then the cruel, then he was cruel, nice, cruel rules. Then all of a sudden he was nice, and then cruel rules again. All these kind of things just is how a person is able to keep power over other people. So we always have to watch that. And it's interesting how you see that their response was very much in the line with the person who's being manipulated. It's like, okay, let's just prove this one more. If we just prove ourselves, if we just prove that we're okay, if we just could prove to them that we're like we're not really spies, if we could just prove to him that didn't really come to steal, we're not thieves, we're not spies. By being thrown off balance, then a person, interesting enough, instead of just trying to regain their own sense of security inside, they're trying to prove themselves to somebody else. It's an interesting dynamic. And because of that, needing to prove themselves, they kept getting drawn deeper and deeper into this scheme. And so it's interesting on many levels, because one of the possibilities that's explained that is they weren't really starving in Canaan, but because they had their own food reserves, but they were afraid of what everyone else was going to think, because everyone else didn't have food, and they were afraid people were going to find out that they had food. So then they made the trip to Egypt to make it look like they needed food like everyone else.
So they didn't need food.
So they didn't even need food in the first place. So it's like when you're trying to get along with everyone else and trying to make it look like you're no different than anyone else, you just get into one trouble after the next, and then you're getting banged from all sides, because that weakness and uncertainty, that insecurity is being sensed. And then a person in a position of having something that you want. You see, that's the other thing. He had the food, and they wanted the food. Once they wanted something that he had, they lost their power. Because then he could say, oh, you want that? You want that so badly? Okay, here. You have to jump through this hoop. Oh, you want that so badly? You have to jump through that hoop. You didn't jump high enough. Let's move the hoop over here. That's what he was doing to them the whole time. You step back and take a look at it. Because he sensed that they were in a place of need. And once you're in a place of need, you lose your power. And that's what happens. We lose our power because we think we need someone for income, we need the government, we need emotional things from a person. So we're thinking we're needing, and then as a result, we're just knocked around because there's two things. One is we can never get what we want, but the other thing is that the person who senses that need now knows he has the upper hand. And if he has anything but the most kind, loving intentions, he can twist that person around and literally destroy a person that's in a state of need. So that's something tremendous we can learn from this, how, and there's many, many details which you could take the time to go into, just see the sophistication of his scheme, that he had to trick them into thinking that they were just about to get out of the trouble, always just about the difficulties. We see that today, like, just if we just comply a little bit more, it's going to be over. If we just show this amount of compliance, then they're going to let us go. Or people, the exact same things happen today. We'll see there's a crushing decree, and then they'll look very friendly and have exceptions. They'll look nice to people. They'll like say, okay, we're going to forgive everyone. We're going to let everyone off the hook for a few days or whatever it is. And then boom, another crushing decree, because all about keeping us off our feet, because we're coming from a place of need. We think we need the government. We think we need their food boxes. We think we need their protection. We think that we need all these things. We think we need the doctors to keep us alive. We're afraid to offend the priesthood of the doctors, because if we offend the priesthood of the doctors, maybe they won't give us health care. Maybe they won't give us medical care. Maybe they won't give us medications. If we offend someone, maybe they won't give us a prescription, because we think we need the medicines in the pharmacy. We've allowed them to decide who can write what can be sold as a drug, who could write the prescription of the drug, who approves it, what quantities it can be released in to every person. So we have to, if a person thinks that they need this prescription, they have to go to a priest, medicine man, who's going to tell them that this is the prescription they need. And then there's a special person who controls the box, and you have to behave in order to be able to get the medication that you think you need to live out of the box. So you need to placate the medicine man, you need to placate the pharmacist, and you need to placate the government that controls the medicine man and the well, they're both medicine men. One's the medicine man that waves a wand, and the other one's the medicine man that actually hands out the medicine. So you see the degree of control they have on people, because people think they need it, and they want to insist that they need it. It's very interesting. All in preparation for this, they had this whole clamoring for a decade that everyone needs health care, everyone needs health care, everyone needs medical attention, everyone's medical attention, health care, health insurance. People are going to die if they don't have medical care. People are going to die if they don't. This whole mantra was going on, but everyone needs medical care, everyone needs medicine, this whole, like, it's essential to have access to doctors. It's life and death. We're not going to be able to live if we don't have access to doctors. So they built up a whole culture of dependency and of need. So this is exactly what then becomes entirely possible to say to a person, okay, well, now that you agree that you need this so badly, you have to vote for the right people, and they're going to give it to you for extra free and discounts, and then you're going to have, you have to make sure that you don't say anything against the doctors, because maybe they're not going to want to treat you, and they're not going to let you give you the piece of paper that's, it's written in hieroglyphics. You can't even read the doctor's writing. You're going to now take this to the special dispensary that first checks to see if the doctor has the appropriate licenses and to be able to allow the medicine out of the dispensary. It's a completely controlled system. So what it does is it puts everyone in the most vulnerable state of feeling they need it, and they're afraid that it's going to be taken away from them. Once you're afraid that something's going to be taken away from you, then someone else can just come and bang, knock the person. Oh, you really want that so badly? Only on Mondays and Wednesdays. You're not really eligible for this medicine. You're not eligible yet. Soon you'll be eligible. You're not essential. You are. There's an essential, non-essential. All kinds of rules that keep everyone on their toes, and they keep constantly changing. So everyone's now in this mode of insecurity. No one knows. Are they going to have their medicine next week? Maybe they're going to change the rules on them again, because maybe the people that are paying for it now, because now everyone's agreeing that it should be controlled by insurance companies. Everyone's agreeing it should be controlled. It's not just, this is how insane the situations become. It's not just that the doctor decides which medicines you could get, and the pharmacy decides which medicine you could get, and the government decides what treatments and medicine you get. But now you're paying your money in either to a private health insurance system, which they then decide and overrule your doctor as to what you're allowed to get it at, or the government health insurance system, which also decides what a person's allowed to get or not. So people focus on it from the angle of it's terrible to put so much control in the hands of some people because it's going to be unfair. They're going to decide who's going to live and die, which they're already starting to decide in other countries. But there's an even deeper point, which is that people on the receiving end become putty because they're so afraid. They need something so badly, and then the terms are constantly being changed by the people who control it. So we can see this left all across the board. Public security, security issues, law enforcement issues, whether they're going to provide law enforcement, not provide law enforcement. Everyone's on edge. Will they defend the country? Won't they defend the country? How many people they get killed before they take any action? People start putting their reliance on the government and certain priesthoods that control these things people need. So what do they hate the most? They hate the people. They hate these controlling people. Hate the people that are independent. They don't want anyone to have their own independent food supply. Because you don't need the governments. You don't need the food boxes. You just grow your own crops in your backyard. They hate the people that don't get sick and don't think they need the doctors, because those people, even though on one hand they don't cost them anything, but they're not under their control. They hate the people that are thinking creatively about healing methods that don't involve the guy in the medicine man in the white coat saying this is the magic potion that you need, and then having to go to the dispensary to prove to them that you have the form, and the insurance company, the people who control the money, deciding whether you're really allowed to have it or not. Anyone who doesn't need those things is not under control. If you don't need their schooling, you're not under the control. If people have their own, with the Second Amendment, they have their own guns and they can defend themselves, they don't need their police forces. So that's what they... And if people stay connected to God, they don't need their psychologists, because they're not going to be mentally ill from the stress because they're going to believe in God. Then they're going to be mentally healthy from knowing that God is taking care of them, and they don't have to sit in unresolved grief and guilt and shame and fear and anxiety and worry and all these things that occupy a person's mind that's disconnected from God. So what you do, what happens is those people stay independent because they don't need their psychologists either. So then you have those people that just don't need any of these, don't need anything. And the end result is they are the ones that stay independent. So they're always trying to find ways. So then people they need the electricity now. People need their Netflix, they need their Disney Channel, their needs get more and more infantile. So you could say, okay, a person needs food. Joseph's brothers needed food. Okay, well, we can understand that. That's a pretty pressing need. But today, people are, not only do they need running water and they need sewers, all these kind of inventions in the last 120 years, 150 years, but they now need air conditioning. They need electricity. They need television, right? They're willing to give up their lives that these things should not be turned off. They're willing to become slaves that these things should not be turned off. Their phones, right, exactly. So that we can learn so much from the trouble that Joseph's brothers got into, and how he was able to manipulate them and play with them. Now, because of their need, because they put themselves in a state of needing, then they were now completely defenseless. They didn't have a way to defend themselves against the scheme, because the mind of the needy man who's being manipulated is always thinking, one more thing. If I just do one more thing, it's going to be over. I'll be able to get out of this whole scheme. Once they realized that something was going wrong and didn't sit well with them, we just do this one more thing. We just prove to him one more thing will be okay. And of course, it wasn't that way. Until it reaches a crescendo at the end of this week's Parsha, that after they brought down their youngest brother, and now they have the youngest brother there, and they tortured their father, so to speak, into surrendering the youngest boy, to saying, but we have no choice if we want to get any food. The king said, Joseph said, and we need it, so we better do what he says. And Jacob's like, no, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. He pushed him off. Finally, like, well, if we don't do it, we're all gonna die, right? It's all that like we're gonna die thing. So we have to give in to what the demands are of the tyranny. So they convinced Jacob against his own best judgment to send down Benjamin. And Joseph now completely outwits them. Because now he takes their money, and like he did the first time he returned the money, but this time he returns their money and he takes his wine goblet and he puts it in the sack. He has it put in the sack of Benjamin. And then when they leave, thinking they finally escaped this nutcase who was torturing them with all these years of playing games with them. Now they think out of his hands. They beat him, they think, because they complied. And they don't realize that he got one up on them because he figured out how to enslave them permanently. And that was, he put his goblet back into Benjamin's sack, and then he sent his men, his officers, chasing after them and said, who stole the goblet? And lo and behold, they open up the sacks, and there it is in Benjamin's goblet is in a sack, and now they're stuck.
That was the younger brother, right?
That was the youngest brother. That's the one that was the most precious to the father. So now they were totally messed up. They were stuck because Joseph says, okay, listen, makes sense you guys are not so straight. You stole, but why should I punish all of you? I'm just going to take the youngest son, keep him my prisoner. Okay? The most precious one to the father. So this is what happens. You can never get your hands out of the person who's trying to manipulate. You can never get your hands out of. Once you start doing business with him, once you start interacting with him according to his terms, it will never end. It will never end. And Joseph got him to the point. Now we're going to see that there is an ending, but to get to the ending, you have to break out of the whole logic of the slavery and the tyranny. We're going to see what happens next week. But where the crescendo of this week's Parsha is, or this week's Torah portion, is that they are trapped. They've been trapped. Joseph has outwitted them because he was able to manipulate them, because he sensed their need. And then by using dishonest tactics, by planting things in their bags on them, he now has them trapped. He's got this boy, Benjamin, trapped for life. He's able to completely exert rulership over this family. They don't know he's Joseph. They think he's the second in command in Egypt. But you see the situation that has now happened, the degree to which they have completely squeezed. So with that, we'll. Yes, still recording. So with that, that's the Torah portion, and let's just do a little prayer. So. So let's review what we did last time with the Shema on page 42. Okay? So we want to make sure that we are focused on this. This is actually even it's printed in the Torah later on that God is that Moses is telling the Jewish people in the book of Deuteronomy, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one." This was actually said originally by the sons of Jacob to their father to promise him that they were going to be loyal, and they were loyal to the one God of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because Yisrael, remember, is one of the names of Jacob. Jacob was given an additional name, Yisrael, Israel. So, hear, O Israel, speaking to their father, the Lord, our God, the Lord is one. So, this is a proclamation that we say at least twice a day, in the morning and the evening, and it keeps us focused, it keeps us oriented towards this absolute commitment and understanding that there's nothing besides God Almighty. And we do not have to in any way take into account the details of the world in making our decisions. We can rise above those details. And that is why we want to make this declaration, to remind ourselves of what's real. And that there's nothing real besides God Almighty. He has created a world, but the world is being constantly created by Him every instant. It has no independent existence from God Almighty. So we don't have to interact with the world like it's a imposition or an interposition in terms of our ability to follow God's will, because the world is being created by God. So it's only a tool for us to reveal godliness in it. So there we go.
So then the rain started coming down powerfully.